I got married last month to the love of my life, Sam. It was everything I'd hoped it would be, small, beautiful, and filled with people I genuinely care about. Well, almost everyone. There was one very obvious absence, my dad. And it wasn't an oversight. I didn't invite him. At all. The twist? He paid for the wedding. Let me explain. My parents divorced when I was 11. My dad was never physically abusive or anything, but emotionally? He could be intense, controlling, judgmental, and incredibly critical. Especially of me. When my parents split, I lived with my mom. She's always been warm, empathetic, and supportive, but she never made much money. My dad, on the other hand, remarried a few years later, had 2 more kids, and started a new life. We stayed in contact through my teens, but things were strained. He'd make passive-aggressive comments about how I was turning out soft like your mother, or how I needed to toughen up and stop being so sensitive. Every phone call felt like walking a tightrope. I spent most of high school dreading holidays that meant being in the same room as him. I never felt like I measured up to whatever unspoken standard he had. College was my first real breath of fresh air. I moved across the country for it, and while that put physical distance between us, it also opened up emotional space. That's when I started therapy, almost immediately. One of the first things my therapist and I unpacked was my relationship with my dad. Or, more accurately, the emotional minefield that was my relationship with him. She pointed out patterns I hadn't seen before, how every nice gesture from him came with strings. How his affection always felt conditional. How I walked around with a subconscious belief that love had to be earned. So I slowly started setting boundaries. At first it was not answering every text. Then not calling back immediately. Then choosing not to visit on his terms. And while it didn't spark a huge blow-up, our contact started to fade. By the time I was 25, we were basically down to holiday greetings and the occasional birthday message. And honestly, that felt healthier. Fast forward to when Sam came into my life. He's the kind of emotionally intelligent, grounded person I didn't realize I needed until he was there. He grew up in a family where people actually talked about things. Where apologies were given freely, and boundaries were respected. Being with him showed me just how much I'd normalized dysfunction. He was the first person I felt truly safe with. He never tried to fix my past, just listened, supported, and reminded me I wasn't broken. 2 years ago, Sam proposed. It was intimate and simple and perfect. We started talking wedding plans right away. We agreed on a smallish ceremony, with around 80 guests, and we started saving. About 3 months in, my cousin mentioned my engagement to my dad at a family gathering, which I hadn't attended, and a week later, I got a long email from him. He said he was happy for me. That he missed me. That he wanted to talk. I was skeptical. But also, curious. So I agreed to meet for coffee. It was awkward. He talked a lot about his regrets, about how he wasn't the best dad, and that he wanted to be part of my life again. He even cried. It was jarring. I didn't know what to make of it. Part of me wanted to believe he'd changed. The other part felt like I was being emotionally baited again. I left that coffee emotionally exhausted and not really sure what I owed him, if anything. Then, about 6 months later, he offered to pay for the wedding. He framed it like an apology. I wasn't there for your milestones, he said. Let me do this. I hesitated. Sam was wary. My mom was blunt. Be careful, she warned. He doesn't give without expecting something back. But the wedding was expensive. Even though we were keeping it modest, we were still looking at close to $20,000. And we weren't there yet financially. So I told myself I could accept this one gesture. That maybe it could be a step toward healing. I didn't forgive him. But I let him in. That was my first mistake. At first, it was fine. He transferred the money to a joint account I set up for wedding expenses. No strings. He didn't ask to be involved in the planning. Didn't ask for credit. It was surprisingly low-key. But then came the little things. Comments about who we should invite. Questions about the venue. Remarks like, I'm sure you'll want your little brother to be the ring bearer, I hadn't even planned on having one. He started dropping hints about walking me down the aisle. Sent me photos of father-daughter dance songs. I hadn't even said he was invited yet. And that's when I realized, to him, paying meant access. It meant inclusion. It meant control. To be fair, he never explicitly demanded to be invited. He just assumed. Because that's always how it worked with him. He gave, and then expected. And I felt myself shrinking again. Feeling that familiar sense of guilt. That I owed him. That I was being ungrateful. But I talked to Sam. And my therapist. And even my mom. And slowly, a different picture started forming. One where I didn't owe him anything. One where I could say thank you for the money and still protect my peace. So I made the choice. I didn't invite him. And everything that came after that is where the real mess began. I didn't reply. 2 days later, I got a call from his wife, my stepmom, if you want to call her that. We've never been close, but we've always been polite. This call was not polite. What the hell is wrong with you? She started with. He's been crying. Do you even understand what you've done to him? I kept my voice calm. I understand that it hurts. But this was a decision I made for my own peace. He paid for it, for God's sake. You took his money and now you're humiliating him. What are people going to think when they find out? And there it was. The core of it. It wasn't about love. Or healing. It was about optics. About narrative. About control. I told her, this isn't about what people think. It's about what I feel. She hung up on me. The next few weeks were a blur of final touches, confirming vendors, doing tastings, picking out centerpieces, finalizing seating charts. On the surface, it looked like everything was going smoothly. Underneath? I was unraveling. Every email notification made my heart race. Every time my phone buzzed, I half expected it to be another guilt trip, another angry message. And sometimes, it was. He never responded directly to my letter. But I got passive-aggressive posts on Facebook, which I didn't even follow, but friends sent me screenshots. Some people will take your generosity and spit in your face. But that's okay. Class shows in the end. It's funny how money is appreciated until the party starts. He never mentioned my name, but it was obvious. And worse? Some of his side of the family started chiming in. Liking. Commenting. Echoing. Aunt Tricia, she always was a little ungrateful. Uncle Dan, your love for her is obvious. Shame she can't see it. It was like being gaslit in public. Like my entire family tree was building a narrative I couldn't counter, because I'd chosen to stay silent. I cried. More than I care to admit. Sam kept reminding me, this day is about us. No one else. And he was right. But when you grow up believing that love has to be earned, that boundaries are betrayals, every step toward autonomy feels like a sin. A week before the wedding, I got a letter. Handwritten. Folded neatly into an envelope with no return address. But the handwriting was unmistakably my dad's. It read. I guess I should have known this is how it would end. You've always been dramatic. But congratulations. You finally erased me. Don't worry, I won't embarrass myself by showing up. I hope your husband understands what he's marrying. I read it once. Then again. Then I tore it up and flushed it, piece by piece. I didn't cry. Something inside me went quiet. Still. Like the final click of a lock I didn't know I needed to close. On the day of the wedding, my mom walked me down the aisle. Sam's eyes were wet when he saw me. My dress shimmered in the light. The vows were soft and shaky and real. We danced to a Fleetwood Mac song. We laughed until our stomachs hurt. We were surrounded by people who loved us exactly as we were. Not one person mentioned my dad. It was the most peaceful day of my life. But now, a month later, the fallout has started again. More Facebook posts. A few relatives have gone quiet. My stepmom told my cousin that my dad is devastated beyond words. A friend I hadn't spoken to in years messaged me to ask, "Is it true you banned your dad from your wedding after he paid for it?" And the guilt is creeping in. Like it always does. So here I am. I didn't take back the money. I didn't give it back either. Part of me wanted to, but Sam and I agreed he gave it as a gift. Unconditionally. That's what he said at the time. But maybe I should have known better. So, the wedding came and went like a beautiful blur. For one full day, I existed in a bubble where everything was soft and golden and filled with laughter. My mom looked radiant, Sam looked floored when he saw me in my dress, and I felt like I had stepped into someone else's life. A life without the constant background hum of guilt, fear, or second-guessing. But as every newlywed knows, reality doesn't take long to crawl back in. And in my case, it came knocking the morning after our honeymoon ended. Sam and I spent a week in Maine. Quiet, cozy airmans, late breakfasts, coastal walks. No phones. We'd promised each other a digital detox, and I stuck to it as best I could. No social media, no email. Just the occasional check-in with my mom to make sure everything was okay. I should have known. When we landed back in town, I turned my phone on and was immediately hit with a storm of notifications. Missed calls. Voicemails. Dozens of unread texts. Most were from unknown numbers. A few were from extended family members I hadn't spoken to in years. And the messages ranged from "what happened" to "you should be ashamed of yourself." My dad had told his version of the story. Apparently, while I was off in blissful newlywed land, he was crafting a tale of betrayal. According to him, he'd graciously offered to pay for the wedding to make up for past mistakes, and I had accepted the money, only to cruelly exclude him from the celebration and shame him in front of the entire family. He didn't mention that we hadn't spoken more than a handful of times in the last decade. He didn't mention the years of emotional manipulation, the therapy, the panic attacks I used to get after visits. He didn't mention the letter I sent. Instead, he painted me as an ungrateful, self-centered brat who used her father for cash and then tossed him aside. And people believed him. At least, some did. Aunt Tricia, again, made a post on Facebook, "There's no pain like watching someone you love be erased." My brother deserved better. One of my cousins, whom I hadn't seen since I was 16, messaged me, "I don't care what your issues are. Family is family. You don't do what you did." And then there was the package. It came 3 days after we got back. No return address. Inside was a wedding photo, one of the professional ones we'd posted on our private wedding website. Someone had printed it, circled Sam's face in red ink, and written across the bottom, "Hope he knows what he married." I froze when I saw it. Sam was in the kitchen. I didn't show him. Not at first. I just stared at it, heart thudding, unsure whether to laugh, scream, or cry. It felt unhinged. Violent, even if not physically so. A threat disguised as pettiness. Eventually, I told Sam. Showed him. He looked at it for a long time and then said, "We need to document this." So we did. We started a file. Printed out messages. Took screenshots. Saved voicemails. I didn't want to believe my dad was behind it. But the handwriting on the photo looked eerily similar to the last letter he sent me. I asked myself, was this just hurt feelings spilling over? Or was it something darker? A control tactic, a punishment for setting boundaries? I didn't know. Still don't. The thing about estrangement is that people don't get it unless they've lived it. It's not like the movies. There's no big, cathartic fight. No dramatic resolution. Just this slow, creeping awareness that a relationship you were born into doesn't nourish you. That it might actually be killing you in pieces. And when you finally draw a line in the sand, people act like you're the villain. Especially when money's involved. My mom tried to intervene quietly. She called a few relatives to explain. Told them this wasn't some last-minute snub but a boundary I'd been inching toward for years. She didn't trash my dad. Just explained the history. The therapy. The panic. The damage. But it didn't really matter. Some people already had their version of events, and they clung to it like gospel. I started losing sleep. I'd wake up in the middle of the night panicking that he'd show up at our apartment. That he'd try to confront me at work. That he'd try to sue for the money back. Yes, sue. I know it sounds paranoid, but the spiral was real. I started Googling legal definitions of wedding gifts. Reading horror stories on Reddit. Wondering if there was a loophole he could use to demand the money back. Wondering if I'd have to defend myself in court for setting a boundary. Sam tried to calm me down. Said it was highly unlikely. That we had documentation. That it would look terrible for him to do that. Still, I couldn't shake the anxiety. So I called my therapist. Told her everything. The wedding. The letter. The fallout. The photo. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something I still think about. When someone is used to you having no boundaries, the moment you build one, they see it as violence. That hit me in the gut. Because that's what this was. My dad wasn't just hurt. He was outraged. He'd spent years believing that love was transactional. That control was affection. That money bought access. And for the first time in my life, I'd said no. Politely, but firmly. And he couldn't stand it. But I still wondered, was it wrong to take the money? Should I have refused it from the start? Should I give it back now? Sam and I talked about it at length. We even went so far as to pull up the bank records, look at our remaining funds, and see if we could feasibly return it. Technically, we could, but it would mean cutting into our savings, maybe delaying plans to buy a house. We ran numbers. Talked options. Then Sam looked at me and said, "You know this isn't really about the money, right?" And he was right. Returning the money wouldn't change the narrative in their heads. It wouldn't undo the Facebook posts. It wouldn't unsend the anonymous photo. It wouldn't make him suddenly accept the boundary. It would just be another hoop. Another attempt to earn love. And I'm done doing that. Still, the guilt lingers. So Reddit, am I the asshole? For accepting his money? For excluding him from the wedding? For prioritizing my peace over his pride? About 2 weeks after the anonymous photo showed up, I finally blocked my dad's number. It sounds like such a small thing, right? A single swipe. But it felt like detonating a bridge. A bridge I'd been afraid to burn, even after all this time. Even after everything he'd done or hadn't done. I think I kept that line open because some part of me, deep down, still wanted him to prove me wrong. To be better. To be the version of himself he sometimes tried to play, the version who cried at dinner and said he missed me. But that version never lasted. And after the photo and the mounting tension, I finally accepted that waiting for him to become that person was like trying to will a mirage into permanence. I didn't block him out of anger. I did it to stop bleeding. 3 days after that, I got a message from his wife. I hadn't blocked her honestly, I'd forgotten to. It said, "You win. He's broken. Hope you're happy." That same afternoon, I got an email. It was from my dad. Different address. Subject line, "You should have talked to me." I stared at it for over an hour before opening it. The message was long. Rambling. Teetering between self-pity and rage. He said he was blindsided by my letter. That if I felt that way, I should have told him sooner. That I used him. That I humiliated him in front of our family. That I always had a flair for drama. Then this. Do you know what it's like to see photos of your own daughter's wedding online, knowing you weren't even considered worthy to sit in the back row? And then. I spent my whole life providing for you, and you repay me with shame. My stomach turned. Because once again, it came back to transaction. Like everything good he'd ever done had been a down payment on my future obedience. But the part that made me feel physically ill was the final paragraph. One day, when you're older and have kids of your own, maybe you'll understand what it feels like to be erased by the person you gave everything to. Until then, enjoy your little fairy tale. I closed the email and just sat there. Numb. Sam came home that night and found me still on the couch, laptop shut, eyes red. I didn't even realize I'd been crying. We talked. 4 hours. We talked about whether I should respond. Whether I owed him closure. Whether I needed it. We talked about boundaries. About forgiveness. About how much time and energy I was still spending emotionally on someone who had never truly shown me safe love. Eventually, we landed here. I'd write a response. For me. Not for him. A final word. Not to reopen the conversation, but to end it. I waited a day. Then I opened a new document and typed. Dad. I read your email. I hear that you're hurt. And I want to be clear, this wasn't an easy choice. It was one I agonized over, discussed in therapy, and considered from every angle. But it was the right choice. You spent years treating me like I owed you for the basics of fatherhood. Like love and respect were things you gave with a receipt. I spent my childhood trying to earn your approval, and my adulthood untangling the damage that did. I don't hate you. But I can't let you keep hurting me under the guise of reconciliation. The money you gave was a gift. You said so. If you regret it, that's your burden, not mine. I wish you peace. I truly do. But I also wish for mine. And that's why I'm not reopening this door. My name. I didn't send it right away. I read it. Reread it. Slept on it. Showed it to Sam. Showed it to my therapist. And then, when I felt ready, I sent it. No further explanation. No subject line. No long preamble. Just the truth. He didn't reply. Not for days. Not for weeks. But others did. His wife. Again. This time via voicemail. You are a cruel, heartless girl. I don't know how your husband can stand beside someone so cold. One of my uncles called my mom and said, we don't know what's gotten into her. She was never like this. And here's the kicker, I started to believe them. Not consciously. Not in a way I'd admit out loud. But in the quiet moments in the shower, folding laundry, walking home alone, I started wondering. Was I cold? Was I cruel? Had I become the villain in someone else's story? That's the worst part about growing up with manipulative love. It teaches you to doubt your gut. To second-guess even the clearest decisions. Because you've been trained to believe your boundaries are betrayals. I talked about this with my therapist. She said something I now have written on a sticky note next to my mirror. Protecting your peace isn't cruelty. It's clarity. It's not that I don't feel sympathy for my dad. I do. I believe he's sad. I believe he feels rejected. I believe he wanted a different story. But I also believe he hasn't changed. Not in the ways that matter. He's still centering himself in every narrative. Still defining love through control. Still using guilt as currency. So I'm not reopening the conversation. Not chasing a redemption arc that only exists in his imagination. I'm choosing peace. And yet, the emails have stopped. But the silence is louder than I expected. Some nights, I lie awake wondering if the door I closed was final. If one day I'll regret it. If some future version of me will wish I had tried harder, explained more, softened the edges. Other nights, I sleep soundly. Because I remember how it felt to plan a wedding while dreading the fallout. How every phone buzz made my stomach flip. How even the happiest day of my life had a shadow trailing it. That's not love. That's control. And I won't live under it anymore. So Reddit. Am I still the asshole for drawing a line? For following through on it? For finally saying no? Life didn't stop after I sent the email. It almost felt anticlimactic, in a way. I expected another wave of drama. More accusations. More guilt-laced voicemails. But instead, there was quiet. Not peace, not exactly. Just a hollow space where noise used to live. I didn't know if that was better or worse. In the weeks following that final message, I kept waiting for something to happen. A reply. A phone call. A new smear campaign on Facebook. But all that came was radio silence. My dad vanished into the background again. Like he had after the divorce. Like he always does when he's not in control of the story. And yet, he was still everywhere. The ghost of him hung in the corners of our apartment. In the way I flinched when Sam raised his voice during a debate about what kind of couch we should buy. In the way I apologized for having opinions. In the way I second-guessed every assertive email I sent at work. He wasn't talking to me anymore, but his influence was still narrating my thoughts. Therapy became heavier. My sessions started to veer away from the wedding and more into childhood. The scripts I'd inherited. The nervous system that had been wired for survival instead of connection. My therapist said something one session that shook me. The wedding didn't cause this. It just cracked the surface. And she was right. The wedding was just the detonator. The grief I felt wasn't only about my dad missing my ceremony, it was about the dad I'd never really had to begin with. But grief doesn't come in clean waves. It comes in loops. Some days I missed him. Or the idea of him. I'd see a dad walking his daughter down the street and my stomach would twist. I'd remember the time he built me a treehouse in the backyard when I was 7. The rare moments when he tried. When I thought he loved me. Then I'd remember the flip side, how he yelled at me for crying after my hamster died. How he told me to stop acting like a baby when I got bullied in 7th grade. How he once called me manipulative at 15 for asking why he missed my school play. It was never consistent. Always conditional. Meanwhile, the rest of the world moved on. Friends started asking when Sam and I were going to try for kids. We'd laugh it off, say, not yet, but it planted seeds. And with those seeds came fears. What kind of parent would I be? Would I carry his patterns? Would I recognize them if they crept in? Would I know how to love without control? Without guilt? I started journaling again. Not the curated kind. Just raw, messy thoughts that sometimes didn't even make sense. One night I wrote. I feel like I severed a limb to save my heart, but now I keep trying to use the limb again and wondering why it hurts. There was a particular day, mid-April, when everything boiled over. I was in the kitchen, trying to cook, and Sam asked if I'd remembered to follow up with the caterer for his cousin's baby shower. It was such a normal question. Neutral. But I froze. My brain heard it as, you messed up. You failed. You're unreliable. I snapped at him. Told him I wasn't his assistant. That he could handle his own family's events. He blinked, stunned. I didn't mean it like that. And I immediately burst into tears. We sat on the floor for an hour, me sobbing, him holding me, while I tried to explain that it wasn't about him. That I was still crawling out of a pit I didn't even know I'd fallen into. He didn't say much. Just listened. Later that night, I asked, did I mess everything up? He shook his head. You set a boundary. It's not your fault some people respond to that with cruelty. But what if I overreacted? What if it was cruel to exclude him? Sam hesitated. Then he said, cruelty isn't about what someone feels. It's about intent. And I know your intent was never to hurt. It was to protect. That matters. That night was the first time I really believed it. I stopped trying to explain myself to people who already made up their minds. I quietly unfriended a few relatives who wouldn't stop posting vague shade online. I told my mom she didn't have to keep defending me. And most importantly, I stopped stalking my dad's social media. I let the silence be silence. Until one day, it wasn't. It was early May when I got the call. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Later, when I listened, I froze. It wasn't my dad. It was my half-sister. She's 17. We've barely had a relationship. I saw her maybe once a year when we were still on speaking terms. She was always sweet, a little shy, obviously caught between two worlds. Her voice was shaking. Hey, I hope this isn't weird. I just wanted to say I saw everything. Online. And I'm sorry. I know what he's like. I know what he does. I guess I wanted to say I get it. And I don't blame you. That's all. I sat there, tears streaming down my face. Because that call, the gentleness in it, meant more than I could articulate. I texted her back. Thanked her. Told her she wasn't alone. We've messaged a few times since. Nothing heavy. Just slowly rebuilding something small. Quiet. Honest. And maybe that's the lesson in all of this. That not every severed tie is a tragedy. Some are incisions. Necessary. Painful. Healing. But sometimes, through the scar tissue, new connections can form. Ones built on truth. So Reddit, am I the asshole for holding my boundary? For grieving someone who's still alive? For finally learning that love shouldn't come with a receipt? After my half-sister called, I started thinking about family in a different way. Not the idealized, Hallmark movie version of it. Not even the cynical, family is who you choose mantra I'd repeated like a lifeline after everything went down. But something more fluid. More nuanced. I realized how much of my healing had been framed around removal. Removing toxic dynamics. Cutting ties. Setting firm boundaries. And all of that was necessary. God, it was necessary, but it also left me standing in a kind of emotional void. I didn't know what to build in its place. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a daughter. Not anyone's, really. It was a strange sensation. Lonely, yes, but also liberating. And into that void came small, unexpected things. My half-sister, let's call her Ellie, started texting me a little more. Mostly benign stuff. College applications. Books she liked. TikToks she thought were funny. She didn't bring up our dad, and I didn't push her to. We just talked. One day she texted, "You always seemed brave to me. Even when I was a kid." It broke me. Because I had never felt brave. I'd felt scared, then numb, then guilty. But maybe bravery isn't about feeling courageous. Maybe it's just about doing the hard thing anyway. Around that same time, I ran into my Aunt Lydia at the farmer's market. She's my dad's younger sister, someone I hadn't spoken to since the fallout, and one of the few relatives who hadn't taken a side publicly. She approached me gently. Said hi. I tensed, expecting a lecture or awkward small talk, but instead she said, "I just want you to know, I understand. More than you probably realize." We ended up getting coffee together. Sitting in the back of a nearly empty cafe, we talked for almost 2 hours. She told me stories about her own strained relationship with my dad growing up. About how controlling their father had been. About how guilt had shaped all of them. "Your dad isn't evil," she said. "But he never learned how to love without ownership." That sentence haunted me. Because it wasn't an excuse, but it was an explanation. It helped me see my dad not as a villain, but as a deeply broken man trying to use old, dysfunctional tools to build connection. Tools that don't work. That leave damage. But understanding isn't the same as letting someone back in. Aunt Lydia never told me what I should do. She didn't preach forgiveness. She just said, whatever choice you make going forward, make it with both eyes open. Not guilt. Not fear. Clarity. I've been thinking about that ever since. Clarity. It's funny how clarity doesn't always arrive with trumpets. Sometimes it creeps in like morning fog, slowly lifting until you realize you can finally see the road again. In this case, clarity came through mundane things. Like grocery shopping with Sam and not apologizing 10 times for picking the wrong brand of pasta. Like speaking up in a Zoom meeting at work and not replaying it in my head for 3 hours afterward. Like texting Ellie back without overthinking my wording. Like saying no to dinner plans because I was tired, and not spiraling about whether I was being a bad friend. It's like my nervous system was slowly learning, it's okay to exist without shrinking. And that realization, that I didn't have to twist myself into a version someone else could love, was revolutionary. But clarity doesn't erase grief. There were still nights when I dreamed my dad called and apologized. Really apologized. Not a guilt-laced monologue, but a real, unguarded acknowledgement. I'd wake up from those dreams disoriented. Sad, but strangely peaceful. Like even my subconscious was starting to believe I was worthy of that kind of closure, even if it would never come. Then something happened that I didn't expect. I got a message request on Instagram from an account I didn't recognize. It was a mutual connection, someone who had gone to high school with me, and who I hadn't spoken to in years. The message read, "Hey, I hope this isn't weird. I follow your cousin Trisha and saw some of her posts a while back. I just wanted to say, I think you did the right thing. It takes guts to draw boundaries, especially with parents. I went no contact with my mom last year. Your story helped me feel less alone." I stared at it for a long time. And then I cried. Not because I was sad, but because I realized how much I'd been carrying alone. And how maybe, just maybe, telling this story mattered. Not just for me, but for other people who'd been raised on conditional love and inherited silence. I started wondering, what if there are more Ellies out there? What if, in refusing to play the role I was assigned, I gave someone else permission to rewrite their script too? That thought didn't heal everything. But it helped. It helped more than I can explain. The truth is, my dad might never understand why I did what I did. He might never see it as anything but betrayal. He might go to his grave convinced that I'm ungrateful, unloving, and cold. But I can live with that. Because I've started to understand something I wish I'd learned earlier. You can't make someone see you clearly if they need to see you as the villain to protect their own ego. You can't win love by being small. And you definitely can't build a healthy future while clinging to a broken past. So Reddit, I'll ask it again. For choosing peace, even when it meant losing a parent? For letting go not out of anger, but out of self-respect? It's strange what people remember about weddings. For all the drama around my dad's absence, the people who were there still talk about how beautiful the ceremony was. The string lights over the garden. The way Sam teared up during the vows. The cake, which, not to brag, was incredible almond with raspberry jam, thank you very much. Even now, months later, we'll get messages from guests saying things like, "That was the most heartfelt wedding I've ever been to." I cling to those moments. Not because I need the validation, but because they remind me that joy was real, even if it had to be carved out of grief. But lately, the questions have shifted. From "How was the honeymoon?" to "Are you talking to your dad again?" It comes up in subtle ways. From co-workers who heard bits and pieces. From extended family trying to mend fences. From well-meaning friends who think time automatically heals all wounds. Are you going to reach out for the holidays? Have you thought about just having a conversation? Do you really want this to last forever? I get it. I really do. People are wired to want resolution. We love arcs. Closure. Neat, tied-off endings where everyone hugs and cries and moves forward. But real life doesn't work that way. Sometimes the apology never comes. Sometimes the other person doesn't grow. Sometimes healing means learning to walk away even when the door is still technically open. Still, I'd be lying if I said it was easy. Especially around the holidays. Thanksgiving was the first real test. Sam and I hosted a low-key dinner, just my mom, a couple of close friends, Ellie, yes, Ellie came, and one of Sam's cousins who just moved to town. It was lovely. But there was a moment, as I was watching Ellie laugh with my mom over wine and pie, that I felt this weird pang. Like there was a ghost at the table, invisible but loud. I wondered what it would have been like to have a dad who could have sat there with grace. Someone who could have raised a toast and meant it. Someone who could have just been a father, without making it about himself. It wasn't longing, exactly. More like mourning for something I'd never had. Ellie noticed me zoning out and nudged me. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. "Just thinking." She looked around the room and then whispered, "I like this family better." I laughed. And I cried later. Quietly, after everyone had gone home. A few days after that, I got a letter. No return address. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It wasn't long. A single page. Neatly folded. "I heard you had Thanksgiving without me." I saw the pictures. Ellie looked happy. "I'm glad she still gets to be part of your life. I'm not writing to guilt you. Just to say I'm trying. In therapy. Not because of you, but because I need to be better. For myself. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know I'm doing the work now. I should have done it sooner. I'm sorry. There was no signature. But I knew. I didn't know what to feel. I still don't. It wasn't the dramatic apology my dreams conjured. It didn't unpack years of pain. It didn't acknowledge the manipulation or the specific wounds. But it was something. A flicker of accountability. A gesture, small and late, but real. I showed it to Sam. He read it twice. Then said, "What do you want to do?" And that question haunted me. Because I didn't know. Part of me wanted to frame it. Hold it as proof that I hadn't imagined the damage. That I hadn't exaggerated. That he knew, too. Another part of me wanted to burn it. Not out of anger, but because it felt like a portal. And I wasn't sure I wanted to walk through it. I brought it to therapy. We spent a whole session just sitting with it. My therapist asked me, what would it mean to respond? And what would it mean not to? I sat with that for a long time. The truth is, I don't hate him. I never have. If anything, that's what made it all so painful. It would have been easier if he'd been a monster. If there were bruises and scars I could point to. But it was quieter than that. It was death by 1,000 cuts. The kind of emotional erosion that doesn't show up in photos but lives in your bones. And when I finally stepped back to protect myself, he made me feel like the abuser. I haven't decided what to do with the letter yet. It's in a drawer. With the wedding photos. With the copy of my final email. With the things I'm not ready to display or destroy. But I'm learning that I don't have to decide right away. That sometimes, strength isn't about choosing action. Sometimes, it's just allowing yourself not to be rushed. In the meantime, I'm still building the life I want. Ellie and I are closer than we've ever been. We've started a little tradition, brunch every other Sunday. Sam comes sometimes. My mom joined once, and it weirdly wasn't weird. I'm writing more. Even thinking about submitting a piece to a magazine about boundaries in weddings and generational trauma. Maybe someone else will read it and feel less alone. And Sam and I are starting to talk, tentatively, tenderly, about kids. It's terrifying. But it doesn't feel impossible. Because now, I believe it's possible to break cycles. To choose differently. To parent with presence instead of pressure. To love without a ledger. So Reddit, what do you think? For letting the apology exist without running back through the door it cracked open? For giving myself space to decide? It's been 3 months since I got that letter. The one where my dad said he was in therapy. The one that ended with, "I'm sorry." I still haven't written back. Not because I haven't thought about it. I have daily, sometimes hourly. I've drafted messages in my head. I've opened blank emails and stared at the cursor blinking like a question mark. But every time, I come back to the same feeling, I'm not ready. And I'm learning to respect that. I think part of me assumed that once I received any kind of apology, the next step would be obvious. That there would be a flood of clarity or a grand emotional release. I imagined some kind of catharsis. But instead, there's just space. Not empty. Just open. I've realized something in that space. It's the first time in my life I haven't been reacting to him. That might sound small, but it's massive. For as long as I can remember, my emotional state was somehow tied to his. If he was in a good mood, I was relieved. If he was withdrawn, I'd spiral. If he gave a compliment, I'd cling to it for weeks. If he criticized me, I'd collapse. Even after going low contact, that loop was still running in my head. Until now. For the first time, I'm living a life that isn't orbiting him. And it feels good. Not perfect. Not healed. But good. Steady. Quiet in a way I didn't know I was allowed to experience. Ellie and I talk weekly now. She's coming into her own in this really beautiful way, applying to colleges out of state, thinking about studying psychology. She said she wants to work with kids from high-conflict families. I didn't cry when she said it, but I came close. We've started being more honest with each other, too. One night she told me, I always felt like he had two versions of himself. One that showed up in public, and one that we saw at home. I nodded. That's how it felt for me too. I used to think it was my fault, she said. Me too. We didn't need to say anything else. That conversation stayed with me for days. It reminded me why I drew the boundary in the first place. Not out of spite, not to punish, but to stop the cycle. To break the illusion that love means being available for someone else's damage. One evening, while cleaning, I found the wedding card my dad had sent before everything blew up. It was buried in a stack of paperwork I hadn't sorted through since we moved. It was a generic card, white with gold script. No handwritten note inside, just his name and a short line. I hope this is the beginning of something better. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. Now, reading it again, I felt a strange ache. Hopeful, sure, but also conditional. It's like he was waiting for the right gesture to erase the past. And when it didn't unfold the way he imagined, he unraveled. There's something deeply human about that. Tragic, but human. I don't think he ever learned how to sit with disappointment. Or with discomfort. Which is probably why, when I said no, he saw it as an attack rather than an act of self-preservation. That realization softened something in me. Not enough to open the door. But enough to wish him well. That's the thing I've come to understand. You can forgive someone and still keep your distance. Forgiveness doesn't have to mean reconciliation. Sometimes it's just releasing the hold someone has over you. Quietly. Privately. For yourself. Around the same time, Sam and I started couples counseling, not because anything was wrong, but because we both wanted to build skills for the long haul. We'd talked about kids more seriously now, and I knew I needed to clear some of the emotional cobwebs still hanging in my mind. In one session, I brought up my dad. I'm scared, I told the therapist. That I'll become him. That I'll hurt my kids the way I was hurt. She nodded. That fear tells me you're already doing the work not to. That hit hard. Sam squeezed my hand. Later, he told me, you're the most intentional person I know. You won't be perfect, but you'll never be careless. Sometimes, healing is just learning to believe people when they say they see the good in you. The holidays passed more gently this year. We stayed in, made cinnamon rolls from scratch, watched cheesy movies, and had a small dinner with my mom, Ellie, and a couple of friends. No drama. No ghosts at the table. In January, I got another letter. Same handwriting. Same no-return address envelope. This time, it was shorter. I've been thinking a lot about what you said. I still have work to do. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. Not all of it. But more than I did. Thank you for being brave enough to say no. I didn't cry this time. But I felt something shift. It's not closure. Not yet. But it's a sign. A ripple. Maybe the beginning of a different story, one I don't need to participate in, but can still acknowledge. For now, I'm still choosing space. I'm still not responding. And I think that's okay. Because this chapter isn't about him anymore. It's about me. About learning to trust my gut. About choosing the life I want to live, not the one I inherited. About writing a new narrative where love is safe, and boundaries aren't betrayal, and silence can be sacred instead of suffocating. It's a weird feeling, this kind of peace. It's not loud. It doesn't come with fanfare or closure balloons. It just is. Like your body finally exhaled after a decade of clenching. And in that stillness, life keeps moving. Sam and I are planning a trip this spring. A real vacation, not just a weekend upstate. We're thinking Portugal. Somewhere with hills and color and pastries that require no guilt to enjoy. Just something to mark the passing of this chapter, something beautiful that isn't burdened with memory. Ellie got into 2 of her top choice schools. When she called me to tell me the news, she cried. I cried too. I think we both knew, in that moment, how much the past year had shaped us. Not just the pain, but the choices we made to not let that pain define us. she asked me if she should tell our dad. I paused. "Do you want to?" I asked. "I don't know," she said. "Part of me thinks he deserves to know. But the other part thinks, he didn't earn this part of me." I didn't tell her what to do. That's something I've learned: people don't always need advice. They need space. Witnessing. A safe container to figure it out themselves. A few days later, she said she sent him a short message. Just a text. "I got into college. I'm proud of myself." That was it. No invite to celebrate. No opening for manipulation. Just a declaration. I wanted it to be mine, she told me. And I was proud of her in a way I didn't know I could be. It felt maternal, almost. Like I was watching a cycle end before it could begin again. Meanwhile, Sam and I have started sketching out the outline of our future. Not in the Pinterest board way. In the spreadsheet, should we renew the lease or start house hunting kind of way. It's scary. But less because of logistics, and more because for the first time, I'm building a life without looking over my shoulder. There's no longer a question of what if he shows up. Or what if they say I'm cruel. Or what if I regret this. It's not that those thoughts don't exist anymore, they do. But they don't run the show. They're background noise. I've had to redefine what love means to me. Growing up, love was complicated. It came with invisible strings. With expectations you weren't allowed to question. With rules that changed mid-game. It made me perform. Apologize preemptively. Second-guess every boundary. Now, love looks like this. Sam pouring the last of the coffee into my mug without asking. Ellie sending me a blurry photo of a sunset and saying, "Thought of you." My mom knitting a baby blanket, not because I'm pregnant, but because it's good to be ready for softness. And maybe that's all love really is. Showing up, over and over, without needing to be asked. Without tallying points. Without making someone earn the bare minimum. A few weeks ago, I did something I wasn't sure I'd ever do. I visited the old neighborhood. The house where I grew up. It wasn't planned. I was in the area for a dentist appointment, real adulthood thrills, and I realized I was only 10 minutes away. So I drove there. Parked across the street. Just sat in my car, staring. The house looks smaller now. The paint is different. There's a new family living there, bikes in the yard, a trampoline out back. I watched the kids running around and wondered what it would have been like to grow up with that kind of laughter. But I didn't feel anger. Or jealousy. Just distance. Like I was looking at someone else's memory. Before I left, I got out of the car and stood on the sidewalk for a moment. I don't know why. Maybe I just wanted to tell my younger self that she made it. That she got out. That she didn't have to keep proving she was worth loving. And then I left. That night, I didn't tell Sam right away. But when I did, he just nodded and said, "Proud of you." There was no big conversation. No analysis. Just that. And it was enough. That's the thing about healing, it doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's just the quiet aftermath of a storm you forgot how to name. I still think about my dad sometimes. I wonder what he's doing. If he's really still in therapy. If he meant the apology. If he still feels like I betrayed him, or if part of him understands now. I don't need the answers anymore. But I think a part of me will always hope he found his own peace too. Maybe not with me, but with himself. It's spring now. The light hits our apartment differently. Warmer. Softer. Sam opened all the windows this morning while I was still in bed and let the breeze in, and I swear I could feel it brushing something loose inside me. Some final knot I hadn't realized I'd still been carrying. We're coming up on our 1-year anniversary. The date has been sitting in the back of my mind, not with dread, but with a quiet sense of awe. A year ago, I stood under a canopy of fairy lights, said vows that still make my chest swell when I think about them, and chose, fully, freely, to love someone who has never asked me to shrink. I've been thinking a lot about the version of me who made that choice. She was scared. She was grieving. She was cutting off one of the most complicated relationships of her life at the exact moment she was stepping into a new one. She felt selfish and cruel and brave and unsure, all at once. But she was also right. Because a year later, I know with certainty, I did the best I could with what I had. And maybe that's all any of us are ever doing. I didn't write back after my dad's second letter. Not because I was angry. Not because I didn't appreciate it. But because I didn't have anything else to say. The door isn't locked. But it's no longer wide open either. It's resting slightly ajar. And whether it opens more or stays where it is isn't just up to me. Sam and I celebrated the milestone early last weekend. We didn't want to wait. We booked a cabin upstate, brought too many snacks, and watched old movies on a laptop propped between two pillows. It was perfect. No pressure. Just the two of us, quietly amazed by how far we'd come. At one point, I asked him, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had invited my dad?" He didn't hesitate. "I think the day would have felt smaller. Like you'd have been waiting for something to go wrong." I nodded. Because he was right. I wouldn't have been able to breathe. I would have spent every moment wondering if he'd say something, do something, make the day about him. Instead, I got to dance. I got to laugh. I got to be fully present. And that gift? It was priceless. Here's the part I've been afraid to say out loud, but I think it matters. Even if I hadn't received the apology, I still wouldn't have regretted my choice. That's how I know it was right. I didn't make it dependent on anyone else's growth. I didn't wait to be validated. I chose peace even when it meant discomfort, misunderstanding, judgment. And that's where I've landed with all of this. This story started as a question. A loud, messy, complicated one. But it turned out to be about something else entirely. Not just boundaries. Not just forgiveness. Not just trauma or healing or reputation or pride. It became a story about what happens when you stop performing. When you stop explaining yourself to people who don't want to understand. When you stop living on someone else's terms. I used to think my job was to maintain the peace. To keep the family glue from cracking. To smooth things over, no matter how sharp the edges were. But peace at the expense of yourself isn't peace. It's erasure. And I'm not erasing myself anymore. This story doesn't end with a reunion. Not yet. Maybe not ever. And that's okay. What it ends with is choice. Mine. To build a family rooted in respect, not fear. To show up for the people who show up back. To love myself enough to say, no more. To say yes only when it feels like freedom. So, Reddit, thank you. For reading this far. For listening. And for letting me tell the story the way I needed to. Maybe, to some people. But to me? I finally feel like I made the right call.